Welcome to Inspire Me with Jay, a podcast discussing meditation, the near death experience, spiritually inspirational and transformative experiences. Welcome to Inspire Me with Jay. I'm your host, author, and teacher, Jay Spillers. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe, and please share it with your friends and share it online. Okay, today I want to talk about a very special experience that happened to me. This was back in 2000, roundabout there. I had purchased a CD from Amazon, and it was supposed to help trigger out-of-body experiences. And when you played it, it had sort of this hypnotic voice on it, and it would sort of modulate in and out, and it was kind of weird to listen to. Like sometimes it'd be very long and stretched, sometimes it'd be very short. And it sounded like they were sometimes like in a can or, it sounded kind of like it was distorted. And then along with it was like this kind of very hypnotic, meditative type music. So I took the CD and I started listening to it every night. I'd basically put it in the CD player and I would put it on repeat so it would play all night as I slept. And I was kind of hoping to possibly have an out-of-body experience. Well, one night I was playing it and I noticed that I was floating by the ceiling and I could feel the sensation of floating. I could see the ceiling and I could see my body. And, I could touch the roof like I was touching it. I had like one of those popcorn ceilings, and my knees would sort of like gently bump against the ceiling. And the only thoughts that I had at the time is that it was like I was aware that I was floating by the ceiling and I could feel what floating felt like. But I had no real conscious thought. Like I wasn't sitting there thinking, oh, I'm floating out of my body. I'm floating by the ceiling. It was just sort of an awareness of knowing. It was an awareness of the experience as it was happening. And that's all there really was to it, because there just wasn't any other conscious thoughts about like, oh, how am I out of my body? What am I doing up here? It was just like you're there, you know. It's sort of like when you're stepping onto a bus and you're taking the steps, you have some level of awareness that you're taking a step onto the bus, but you're not really having all these other thoughts like, I'm taking a step. And you're not thinking about all these things around you. You're just focused in that moment, in that very second. And that's kind of what it was like. And there's a couple different emotions that were going on as I was floating by the ceiling. Is I was feeling at peace. There was sort of like a great peace that was on me. It was very peaceful. And I felt, of course, the sensation of floating. And it was sort of timeless because it's like you had no conception of time. You were just there. It was sort of a timelessness. So there was a great peace, tranquility. There was a timelessness, and there was just a sense of floating. And I would imagine it was probably a very brief experience, but you just didn't have a concept of time. So that's the experience that I had back in 2000. And I think probably in addition to the CD that may have helped trigger the out of body experience for me was I've had sleep apnea probably since I was a very small child. Because people used to tell me I'd fall asleep and I'd stop breathing for several seconds. And my family and friends would sort of like get all freaked out by it. They're like, Jay, you just stopped breathing for several seconds. So, and I could go back to my childhood. I could go back to being very young that this would happen. So I was reading that when you have sleep apnea and you stop breathing for several seconds, it's not an uncommon experience for people to sometimes feel like they have an out of body experience or they pop out of their body, because it's sort of like the brain uh, is deprived of oxygen, and then you have this experience. Do I think it was all just a matter of the brain being deprived of oxygen? I don't necessarily think so, because it's sort of like, in a spiritual sense, you're preparing to cross into the next realm, kind of like a near-death experience. Only I wouldn't describe this as really a near-death experience. I just call it an out-of-body experience because it was so brief, and the only experience was that sense of floating. No, no awareness outside of being in that moment. So it's a very common experience when you have sleep apnea, that you might have this. And I think it's maybe connecting you to sort of the God part, that the brain's starting to shut down, the spirit's starting to come into play, as you're starting to maybe get ready to leave your body or leaving your body. So I think it is a genuine spiritual experience that I had, and that maybe many others have had too. It wasn't until probably less than a year ago that I would have said this was an out of body experience, because I always thought it was more just like a dream or a lucid dream. But then I got to thinking about it. I've had dreams. I've had lucid dreams. Dreams usually, there's sort of a lot of disjointed things to them, and they're just kind of all over the place, and they don't really make sense. This didn't have anything like a dream where you have the disjointedness and sort of this jumbledness. It was a very clear thing what was going on. I was floating by the ceiling, just hovering, floating. There was nothing other than being by the ceiling that was weird or disjointed about it. And it wasn't really like a lucid dream, because I've had a few of those, and I'll tell you about those. I had one lucid dream where it was about a month after my dad passed. He came and visited me. He was sitting in a chair. He looked about 20 years younger than when he passed, because he passed when he was 73. He looked like he was maybe um, early to mid 50s. And he was wearing this black and purple sweater that he liked to wear, especially in the 80s and 90s, somewhere in there. He had that sweater on. And, we were just sort of talking and being with each other. And the dream closed with me asking him what it was like to be in heaven and to be with Jesus and all that. And the dream quickly ended, and he whispered in my right ear, he said, "It's wonderful." And then I woke up, and it was like, I was just like totally jazzed. It was like a very wonderful feeling. It was kind of a blissful feeling that I had. But in this lucid dream, I had full awareness of what was going on. It felt like when I was awake, and I had awareness that I was in a dream. And I had another lucid dream like that, like before my son was born, a couple weeks. Uh, my grandparents came to me on my mother's side, and I interacted with them, and it was kind of the same thing. Felt very real, very much like when you're awake. I came to realize I was in a dream, very vivid. And actually, my dad made a brief appearance there too, because he was reading the newspaper, and he looks down because he said, "We have somebody to show you." And then, he goes down like that. So that was a lucid dream too. But you said that very vividness but you have awareness that you're in a dream, and it feels very much like a waking state. But unlike these kind of two lucid dreams that I had, I was not having all kinds of thoughts. I was not aware that I was dreaming or anything like that. And it wasn't just jumbled like a regular dream. So I genuinely came to the conclusion that it was an out of body experience. And I don't know how to describe it other than to say it felt different than a lucid dream or a regular dream. And it had a timeless quality about it that the lucid dreams don't exactly have, because lucid dreams, you still feel a bit of linear time progression in the dream. Um, but I didn't have that during this out of body experience. It was just like you're there. It's um it's I mean, probably a lot of people that have had near death experiences could probably relate to that, just that timelessness. How do you describe it? It's hard to describe. It's something you just have to experience. So I came to realize I had this out of body experience just like it was less than a year ago, and it happened back in 2000. And then I thought, well, there was actually at least one other time, and maybe more, when I was a small child. I can remember being out of my body during the night, floating by the ceiling. And I remember that happened at least one other time in my childhood. I don't remember much about it. It was kind of the same thing. The only awareness you have is the sense of floating and being by the ceiling, but you don't really have a lot of other thoughts connected with it. Like you're not thinking, oh, I'm by the ceiling. But so it was very similar to that 2000 experience. And I was about in my late 20s then. And it's a pretty awesome experience. And I kind of think it didn't spiritually transform me in the sense like, oh, wow, I had this experience and it just made such an impact on my life. Like a lot of people that have other people that have had more profound OBEs or NDEs may have described a much more spiritually transformative experience. But I think it might have triggered something, because it's sort of like when you're out of your body and your spirit, it may have sort of opened up a portal to the spirit realm. Because from an early age on, I've had a very strong interest in things like religion and spirituality. And a lot of kids do, but it's like it never really left because, I've always had that. And you see it sometimes with other people, but like you see someone that has zero interest in religion or spirituality, and you think, wow, I don't relate to that. I'm not trying to judge them, that's how they feel. But for me, it was like, I was always kind of like enamored with spirituality and religion. And then later, when I was about 11 years old, watching that special on TV, That's Incredible, about near death experiences, and then really getting excited about the near death experience, because it was sort of like what religion talks about, in sort of an abstract sense. And this is sort of like people in my time really having an experience with God, really having an experience in the afterlife. So it was like I was really enamored with the near death experience as well. And then later, getting into meditation, I think maybe part of why I got into meditation was because this portal was opened. And I felt like meditation's a way to connect with the divine and connect with spirituality and your faith. I started meditating in 2005. That was about 5 years after the experience in 2000. So I think that it had a lasting impact in that respect of being interested in spirituality, religion, the near death experience, and meditation. And just for anybody who wants to know, um, in 2013, I went and had a sleep study, and I've had a CPAP machine since 2013. So I don't my sleep apnea is under control that way. But it was just kind of an interesting experience. I never had sleep apnea or if I'd had it under control much longer, would I have had the experience in 2000? And if I never had it, would I have even had the one in childhood? Well, I guess maybe not, you know. Maybe the CD would have been enough to put me there, but I think the deprivation of oxygen for several seconds helped me to have that popping out and being by the ceiling. And, I mean, it would have been kind of cool if I would have come to have more awareness like people that have near death experiences tend to have, but I just didn't have it. But, just realizing that you likely had a out of body experience kind of is exciting in the sense that, okay, I'm more than my physical body. And I know that when physical death arises, I will survive on, I will live on. And of course, I know that because, I'm a very faith oriented person and I've studied the near death experience and I've been convinced by them. But I kind of have a little bit of my own personal experience there with being out of body. So I sort of have something that's personal to me that says, okay, I will survive physical death. And that's kind of cool. And I remember talking to someone online that I knew one time that had an out of body experience that was very brief too. She had gone to the dentist and I guess gotten too much anesthesia and she popped out of her body and was floating above. And it was a very brief experience. And for her, it kind of had the same thing like, I'm going to survive physical death. I'm more than my physical body. And there's actually been a few near death experiences that I've heard about from people that went to the dentist and got too much anesthesia and popped out of their body. And unlike her, they had, a much more vivid experience. They might have had interactions with people on the other side or even gone to a place like, a heavenly realm. But I just thought that was kind of interesting. So we will close out today with a brief meditation. Close your eyes, relax, and get comfortable. Just taking a few deep breaths. Breathe in deeply through your nose. Hold. Exhale through your mouth. Exhale fully. Now breathe in deeply, again, through your nose. And exhale. Breathe in deeply. Exhale. Just take in one more deep breath. Breathe in deeply. And exhale. Now just imagine that you're standing by a river. It's a giant flowing river. It's moving very quickly. Just notice what you would see there. You can see the flowing water. There's white foam. You can hear the river. Maybe you're close enough to even feel some of the little water hitting your skin. The sky is very blue. There's patches of clouds. There's trees surrounding the side you're on the other side of the river. Green grass. There's some flowers in the distance. Might hear a few birds. Just take a moment to see and hear, experience what else you might encounter by the river. Now notice about 20 feet away, there's an inner tube and a raft side by side. See yourself walking towards them. Now when you get to them, choose either the inner tube or the raft and imagine yourself getting in the river to float down. It's okay, whichever one you choose. Now you're in the river, you start to move, start to float down. Just notice your body just floating on the river. Allow yourself to really feel the floating. You can feel the ebb and flow of the water as you move a little bit up and down in the inner tube or raft. Notice any sensations. You can feel the water. You can feel the warm sun on your skin as you just float down. Just take a second to feel the movement of the water as you're floating down gently. And you might not start to notice things that are going by on the sides. You're passing trees, passing rocks and grass, flowers. Maybe in the distance you see a mountain. You can see yourself moving towards the mountain. What else do you see as you float? Let's take a moment to just float along the river. And we'll just take in one final deep breath. We'll start to come back to the room. Let's take in one final deep breath. Breathe in deeply through your nose. Hold. Exhale. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes.